We identified 2 other people that handled and or inspected the loaded firearm prior to Baldwin firing the weapon. These 2 individuals are Armorer Hannah Reed Gutierrez and Assistant Director David Halls. All 3 individuals have been cooperative in the investigation and have provided statements. The actual lead projectile that was fired has been recovered from the shoulder of Mr. Souza. We regard this specific spent casing and recovered projectile to be the live round that was fired from the revolver by Mr. Baldwin. We have recovered what we believe to be possible additional live rounds on set.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to look at whether Rust will be abandoned, the movie, and will Alec Baldwin be abandoned? Because his PR battle for public support continues. Do you think he's winning that battle? Within the last few hours, Alec Baldwin posted a memo written by his crew to his 2.4 million followers on Instagram. The 2-page memo defends Baldwin and the crew without explicitly mentioning him, basically saying how wonderful conditions on the set were. It's addressed to no one in particular, but one supposes to whom it may concern, basically means us, everyone. So before we get started on today's episode, just a reminder that I am covering the Delphi case, certainly the latest developments in that, and I will also be doing the Moab incident deep dive number 4, so look out for that within the next day or so. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do like, share, leave a comment. If you want to subscribe, you can click on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen. And let's get started. So I find it interesting that right off the bat, the letter claims not to have been the idea of Baldwin. And in fact, his name isn't mentioned anywhere in the letter, not even once, even though he is at the center of the crisis. He is the, in a way, not the cause of the controversy, but certainly the epicenter of it. And so the fact that his name isn't mentioned is kind of quite glaring, as if to say, oh, he had nothing to do with it. Do you think he had absolutely no input in it? Do you think he didn't see it? Do you think he had no knowledge that it was being written? And yet clearly Baldwin did have the most to gain by being validated by his crew in the letter, and certainly those that are still sticking by him. It is actually important that those who stick by him show and demonstrate and, express their admiration and their respect and their allegiance to him, because there are at least 6 others who aren't. And I think Baldwin does feel validated, does need this letter, so much so that he's posted the letter on his Instagram. Now, in terms of page 1, these are the highlights. This is a quote: "The public narrative of the incident, they believe, is inadequate." And bear in mind, that is also what Baldwin said on ABC and why he went on to ABC. He thought that what was being said was not right and he wanted to address that. Well, this is part 2 of that. It also goes on to say, we are hurting, and also that Rust, the production, was professional. Was it? There's an article in TMZ that Nicolas Cage yelled at the Rust armorer for discharging a weapon, I think, very close to his ears, I think even on more than one occasion. The descriptions of Rust as chaotic, dangerous, and exploitative are false, according to the memo. It's quite interesting that they mention those 3 words, chaotic, dangerous, and exploitative. They don't just say the descriptions of Rust in the media or wherever are false. And so what do you think of those words, chaotic, dangerous, and exploitative? Say what you will about that, but how many of those words describe the producer, Baldwin? How many of those words, chaotic, dangerous, and exploitative, describe him? Going back to the letter, the first page, the disgruntled few don't represent the views of all of us. Clearly not. But the fact is the death of the cinematographer seems to validate the assertions made before her death, don't they? And so whether majority think things were one way or not, Helena was shot. And I think it actually comes down to one simple thing. Was there live ammunition on the set? The armorer says there wasn't, but clearly there was a lot. The armorer may not have known there was, but clearly there was. And whose job was it to make sure? The final paragraph on page 1 is at pains to assure everyone that things were hunky-dory, when again Helena's death and Baldwin's not entirely believable story afterwards put some of that in doubt. Was everything hunky-dory? The fact that 6 crew members quit immediately prior to the incident, not after the incident, prior, not 1 or 2, but 6, is very significant. And now we go into page 2, and we'll deal with some of the reasons they gave, those 6 crew members, for why they did quit. So on to page 2, it talks about the morale on set being high, that everyone was happy. Well, clearly not everyone was happy. Otherwise, those people wouldn't have quit. It goes on to sort of sketch the scenario of everyone laughing like so many merry piglets coming to work. Hi ho, off to work we go, kind of thing. The letter is very thin on the details that matter. The specific protocols when it came to the guns and how reliable and experienced was the armorer. Hannah Gutierrez Reed, in fact, she's not mentioned at all. Like Alec Baldwin, Hannah's name is entirely missing, also from the signatures of the 25 crew members at the bottom of page 2. It goes on to say, we were inspired by the screenplay. Nice punt of the movie after the fact. There does seem to be a certain amount of grudging admission that the days were scheduled tightly. In other words, chaotic, isn't it? The days were scheduled tightly. What does that mean? Doesn't it mean there wasn't much time? Now bear also in mind, the day after the 6 quit is when this accident happened. The day after the 6 quit, there would be less attention, less resources to pay attention to certain details because there were now less individuals. And so I don't know whether one couldn't say that on that day, the day after the 6 quit, wouldn't that day have been particularly chaotic? Wouldn't that day have been chaotic? Also goes on to say the producers, meaning Baldwin, were supportive. You'd imagine that would go without saying. And then it goes on to say the words, they availed themselves during safety meetings to discuss any and all safety and other concerns. Doesn't it feel like a lawyer inserted that? Just the way that is written. Not too many people would say they availed themselves and any and all. Anyway, the email from a disgruntled employee, and we'll get to that, clearly states that there were no safety meetings, and no in all caps, and a lack of consultation regarding shots. So one wonders whether this letter, what is the purpose, what is the motive, what is the reason behind this memo? Well, isn't it a response, a rebuttal to that email? Isn't that what's really going on here? Then it goes on to say, please do not allow a few disgruntled employees to affect your view. It's not a few, it's 6, it's quite a lot. In any event, this is the second reference to the views of the many outweighing the views of the few. Should they? Does that sort of thing happen in an investigation? Well, it shouldn't. We kindly request that your speculations about us be sympathetic until an investigation is concluded. I thought that is quite a strange request. We kindly request that you be sympathetic towards us. Wait until the investigation is concluded. It sounds like everything must stop except the producer pleading his case, and he has a special case to plead on ABC. It really does sound like special pleading. Give us the benefit of the doubt. Don't talk about this. Don't speculate about this. Don't think about this. Just feel sorry for us, right? It makes sense that this particular memo, two-page memo, would follow Baldwin's one-man PR campaign on ABC a week ago. Make no mistake, this is a battle for the lion's share of public support. Meanwhile, in the background hangs the fate of a film scuttled in the middle of production and the future of the once eminent actor at the center of it, and probably to some extent the jobs of a lot of the people who've written this memo. And somewhere in all of this is acrimony, lawsuits, and a police investigation. Somewhere in there are truths hiding beneath the veneer of how wonderful everything was, truths hidden by the fairy tale. I think it's interesting in the memo that there isn't an admission anywhere really of any mistakes or problems. Really? No fights on set? No disagreements? No arguments? Isn't that something that happens somewhere in every movie? And does Baldwin leave all of his animus at home? And so when he's on set, he's passive as a lamb. He's nice. He's not confrontational. He's not reactionary. Think about it. Most creative folk are at their most strident and combative in creative situations, right? It's all about expressing themselves, and that's one of the things they will do, and say, I think it should be done this way. I still think the complaint about lax COVID policies is perhaps analogous to other things being lax. The fact that there were 2 accidental discharges before a third, the third one being fatal, doesn't that clearly show things were not as professional as they should have been, as they could have been, as they needed to be? In terms of Gutierrez Reed, it's been claimed that she wasn't in the room when the accident happened, and she wasn't the one who handed the gun to Baldwin. Well, fair enough, but why not? Wasn't it her job as prop person and armorer to handle and hand over and supervise the props? So where was she when this fatal accident occurred? Interestingly, Gutierrez Reed's father said she complained about being assigned these twin tasks. She should have only been a prop person or only been an armorer. And so this gives you a sense of the word exploitative. Did she feel she was being exploited? Given 2 jobs but for a single paycheck kind of thing. Didn't she complain to fellow crewmates as well? Well, why is that not mentioned? And so in 2014, 7 years before Rust, Baldwin penned the following in an article published in Vulture. I think it's just interesting to repeat here. 2014, 7 years ago, he wrote the following, quote, I find myself bitter, defensive, and more misanthropic than I care to admit. Misanthropic means antisocial, unfriendly. I find myself bitter, defensive, and more misanthropic than I care to admit. And I'm trying to understand what happened, how an altercation on the street cascaded like this. There's been a shift in my life, and it's caused me to step back and say, this is happening for a reason. And that's the end of the quote. Now, misanthropic means antisocial or unfriendly. In that case, 7 years ago, Baldwin also claimed innocence. And just look at that. He's bitter and misanthropic, yet he apparently never makes mistakes, never does anything wrong. That was 7 years ago. I can't help but think Rust is a strangely portentous title for this film and for the events that transpired. Rust is something that happens when metal ages. It sometimes happens to old men too. And if he got rusty, perhaps he wasn't the only one. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.